Hello students, today's agenda is to check homework. We'll be learning about secant lines, secant line angles and tangent line angles, and you will be able to work on 9.3. Today students will be able to find angles created by secant lines and tangent lines intersecting inside and outside of the circle. So secant lines are lines that intersect a curve at two or more points. In this case, because the curve is a circle, in reality it's going to be touching at 2 points. So this is a secant line because it touches right here and right here. And this is another secant line. And we'll be using a formula that is a little bit like this, although the x might change the place where it's at. So it's x is equals to a minus b divided by 2. So whenever we have two secant lines, and it's going to make more sense once we start applying it, but a minus b, notice how these arcs are kind of like inside of those two secant lines, okay? A minus b divided by 2 will give me this angle that is outside of the circle. Now the tangent lines are lines that intersect at one point, okay? And not each other, but the curve. And so this tangent line intersects right here. Sometimes this can be extended all the way to the other side, but it touches only one point, okay? So this is a tangent line, this is another tangent line. And to find this outside angle, it's the same rule. You have the bigger arc, which is A, minus the smaller arc, which is B, and you divide it by 2, and that gives you this outside angle. Okay, let's put it into practice with some examples. So it says that you have two secant lines here because they're touching 2 points. And so you're going to subtract this, divided by 2, and that's going to give me that value. And so x is equals to a minus b. I don't know if I should be using the formula because then, as I mentioned, sometimes the x is not going to be here. So it's going to be x is equals to 90 because that's a. I always said that it's like a cone, so whatever is on top is the ice cream, so that's a is 90 minus the other arc that is formed here is 40 divided by 2. I think I need to zoom just a tiny bit, not too much, but okay. And then 90 minus 40 is 50 divided by 2, so the value of x is going to be 25 degrees. Okay, so that's how many degrees this angle opens. Okay, let's do another one. Again, if you need to go back to it, just remember to either pause the video or you can just rewind. Okay, in here, notice how we are not missing x in here. So, and that's where it gets tricky. So I'm just gonna put that the value of x, we need to subtract 60. Now before we do that, notice how in here we have, and that's not the reason for which we're putting this x in here, we have a secant line and a tangent line because this one is touching only 1 point. But again, the important thing is that formed by those two lines, we have a bigger arc, a smaller arc, and we have this one that we're not going to be using. But we have this one, which is x, minus this one, which we called before a and b. And the rule is to divide by 2. And that was going to give us the value of this angle, right? But now we have that value. So be careful. When we have what I call the point of the cone, okay, that's what goes outside alone. In the previous one, notice how that was x, and so that was all by itself before the equal sign. Okay, so that goes out first, equal, and then the bigger arc minus the smaller arc, and divided by 2. Since we cannot really subtract x minus 60, what we're going to be doing is canceling to solve and figure out the value of that x. So if we're dividing by 2, the opposite is to multiply by 2. We're applying our algebra skills here. 2 times 50 is 100 is equals to, this was canceled, so all I have left is x minus 60. If I'm subtracting 60, the opposite is to add 60. And so the value of x is equals to 160 degrees. So this right here is 160 degrees. And let's see, you can even check to see if it makes sense. 160 minus 60, that's 100. 100 divided by 2, 50. So it makes sense, okay? Again, when do we do this canceling and solving instead of just simplifying? When we have the value of the bottom of the cone, the point of the cone. That's when we have to isolate x. Okay, let's do one more. This one is now 2 tangent lines. And remember, the rule is to subtract the big arc minus the small arc divided by 2 gives me that value. However, what's going on in here? I don't know the value of this bigger arc. However, I can figure it out because we know that the whole circle is 360 degrees. So if the circle, the degrees of a circle is 360, I can just subtract the 90 degrees, and that's going to give me this other arc. Okay, so 360 minus 90 is equals to 270 degrees. So that's the value of this arc. So now we can say that x is equal, remember the point is always first and then equal, the bigger arc, which is 270, we just figured it out, minus the smaller arc divided by 2. And so 270 minus 90 gives me 180 divided by 2. And so 180 divided by 2 is equals to 90 degrees. Okay, so this x is equals to 90 degrees. Again, 270 take away 90 is 180 divided by 2 gives me 90 for this one. Okay, that's when you have secant lines or tangent lines. Okay, it goes outside of, the lines go outside of the circle, okay, and form an angle outside. See, it forms an angle outside. That's the rule. A minus B divided by 2 to find that outside angle. A minus B divided by 2. Now, what if we have 2 intersecting lines? It says, internal intersecting angles measure half the sum of its corresponding arcs. Okay, that's what this says in here. What that means is that if you have 2 lines, but they're inside of the circle, not outside like the secant and the tangent, these are called chords. Okay, and chords are, it's like the diameter, but they do not go through the middle of, or through the center of the circle. So chords go from one side of the circle, whoops, to the other. But they don't go through the middle of the circle. Otherwise, the chord will be called diameter. Okay, so whenever you have two chords intersecting, what it says is that they form, I call it, that they form like a bow in here. Okay, like a bow in here. And anytime you see this kind of figure, what you're going to do is that you're going to get A plus B and then get half of that sum. In our Latin American countries, what we do, instead of putting 1/2 times A plus B, we say that it's going to be A plus B divided by 2. It's exactly the same if you multiply by 1/2 or if you divide by 2. You get the same results. Notice how in here we have A plus B, A plus B. Multiply by 1/2, divided by 2. Same thing if you divide by 1/2, multiply by 1/2 or divide by 2. And so that's the rule. Only, I call it a bow. I don't know if you can see the bow. It's like a bow tie or something like that. You're just missing that little, like. Okay, so it said you don't have that. Okay, so that's the rule. Let's apply it. So we have these two. In the previous, when you have secant and tangent lines, what you do is subtract. But in here, we don't have like a cone with ice cream. Instead, we have the bow. And what we're going to do is we're going to add these two. Some people call it, when you have the X, because it looks like an X in here. Yeah, you just add the arcs outside formed by those two lines, intersecting lines, divided by 2, and that's going to be the answer for X. So in this case, X is equals to 90 plus, plus 40 divided by 2. And 90 plus 40 gives me 130. We divided by 2. And so the value of X is 65 degrees. So this is equals to 65 degrees. Remember, you add the 2 and divide it by 2. But you will not always have that, and that's when you have to solve for X, okay? In here, we would have to add these two. This is a bow again. These need to be added. However, you cannot add 40 to X. So what you're gonna do is write this by itself. Instead of X, you're gonna put 50 is equal to 40 plus X divided by 2, okay? When we have the value of that, we put it in there. And so we start solving. If we're dividing by 2, the opposite is 2. Multiply by 2. This cancels. You have 40 plus X. 2 times 50 is 100. Remember, we're adding because this forms an X. It doesn't form like a cone going outside of the circle. Okay, that's why we're adding and not subtracting. And so now we're adding 40 to X, so the opposite is to subtract 40. And X is equals to 60 degrees. And if you notice, 40 plus 60, 100. 100 divided by 2, 50. Okay, that's a quick way of checking for the answer. Okay, let me do one more. Now it's, what do we have? Okay, we don't have one part of the outside of the bow tie. Okay, and so again, if that's what we have, that's what we're gonna put all by itself. Is equal to, these need to be added and divided by 2. So x plus 100, it doesn't matter which one you put, if 100 and x or x and 100, okay? Divided by 2. The reason for which we're putting this one in here and not here is because that's the inside angle, okay? When we're missing that, when this has x, that's where we put x in here. So if we're dividing by 2, the opposite is to multiply by 2. Division, the opposite is multiplication. This cancels. 2 times 60 is 120. And that's equals to x plus 100. If we're adding 100, the opposite is to subtract 100. This cancels. And so the value of x is equals to 20 degrees. So this is 20, and you can see it's tiny, so it makes sense. Now let's see. 100 plus 20, 120. Divided by 2, 60. Now remember from previous lessons that these are vertical angles, and if this is 60, this is also going to be 60. Something to remember from before. Okay, let me see. I have one more, but it already has the solution. So I'm gonna cover one with my finger, I think, and then I'll uncover it. Hopefully you cannot see it. Okay, let's see that that's what you have, and you're trying to find B. So pause the video right now. I know I was supposed to cover that instead, but that's okay. Pause the video, say that this is 110, this is 95, what would be this? Okay, I'm gonna uncover the answers. Hopefully you already tried it on your own, and voila. Oops, that's the value, 80. Okay, but I was supposed to cover that. Okay, with this you're now able to do 9.3. Hopefully I didn't confuse you with this last example. Just remember, with this type of answers, this type of exercises, you subtract a minus b divided by 2. This forms two angles on the two arcs on the circle, but then the angle that we're looking for is outside of the circle. It's an external. This also forms 2 arcs on the circle, but the angle that we're looking for is internal. Okay, so in here we add and divide by 2. So have fun working on 9.3.